Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to also start by thanking the organizers, the Color Press Group, and the Diplomacy and Commerce magazine, which was launched last week. Very interesting magazine, I have to say. I read the first edition of it last week. To note also that on the floods, the EU delegation is, together with our colleagues in Brussels, very closely monitoring the situation. We are in touch also with the authorities on any possible assistance that might be required from our side. I would like to use this opportunity to say a few words about the Energy Union that was launched last year. Then focus a little bit more on the Serbian situation and say a few words about our assistance. As you may know, last year the Energy Union was launched. We had the Vice President of the European Commission coming, Mr. Šefčovič. Actually, he came to Serbia as one of the first countries, also underlining the fact that this energy union is a common union, not only of EU member states, but also of countries in the Western Balkans and candidate member states. Maybe shortly, just to remind you what the main pillars are of this energy union. First of all, it's the extension and establishment of a real common internal energy market. To have a big market which is aimed at having legislation in place that increases competition, eventually leading to lower energy prices for both companies and citizens. And this is done through, for example, when it comes to pipelines, ensuring third-party access to these pipelines, having differences in ownership versus transit, and also having regulators play a firm role in price setting, all to avoid a lack of competition. The second pillar is the one of energy security, very much linked, of course, to energy dependency. Here we are very much interested in linking energy networks with each other, so here interconnectors play a very important role. Decarbonisation, the ambassador already mentioned the Paris summit, which of course once again underlined the need for a more clean energy sector. Energy efficiency is another pillar which I will come back to in the context of Serbia in a moment. And then finally, stimulation of research and development, and also linking education much more to the energy sector, leading eventually to a more competitive sector as a whole. Now, these different parts of the energy union are already worked on by Serbia, and it's been done in the context of, I think, two very important processes. The first one is the so-called Energy Community Treaty, of which Serbia is a member, which basically means that Serbia is already foreseen to implement the same energy legislation as is in place in the European Union. This is what was already mentioned by the Minister, the second and the third energy package of the European Union, aimed at, for a large part, unbundling of energy operators. The second process, which I would like to mention here, is the so-called World Bank 6 process, or Berlin process as it's also often referred to. This was started 2 years ago with the aim to have a much more, a better connectivity between countries here in the region, the Western Balkans, but also between candidate member states here and EU member states. This takes place both in the areas of transport, but also very much in the area of energy. And I would like to underline here that when people hear about this Western Balkan 6 process, the first thing they think about is infrastructure. But I think what is actually equally important is what are so-called soft measures. So here, as I mentioned, the unbundling of operators in the energy sector is very important. Having legislation in place, implementing legislation to ensure this process that will eventually lead to more competition and better tariffs for citizens and companies. But of course, infrastructure plays a huge role. Under the Western Balkan 6 process, a couple of projects for Serbia have been identified as key projects, which are also eligible for funding through the World Bank Investment Framework. The European Commission will provide grant funding, and that is matched then by very concessional funding of international financial organizations like the European Investment Bank, the World Bank, and the EBRD. Now focusing a bit more on Serbia's situation. Where are we when it comes to energy in the accession process? Well, we had the screening process already for the energy chapter finalized in 2014. The European Commission drafted the screening report. This had 2 opening benchmarks, and maybe I should explain a bit the methodology. The opening benchmarks for chapters are usually in the form of plans or action plans being in place, clearly specifying how a country, a candidate member state wants to implement EU legislation in the years ahead. And closing benchmarks are much more looking at the actual track record, at the fact whether or not a country is actually succeeding in realizing its goals mentioned in the legislation. For Serbia, there are 2 opening benchmarks. One is the adoption of an action plan on arriving at a minimum oil stock, and the second one is the adoption of a plan on unbundling in the gas sector. Now, where are we on both of these opening benchmarks? On the first one, the minimum oil stocks, the plan was adopted in December last year, as well as an organogram for the directorate to implement this action plan for establishing minimum oil stocks. And on the second one, the plan on unbundling in the gas sector, we already had at the end of 2014 a decision adopted by the government on the way forward. So this is definitely positive that progress was made on these 2 opening benchmarks. We are now looking into these plans. So we are in the process of what is called drafting our opening benchmark assessment report to see whether these plans are detailed enough, whether they have the right data on specification of responsibilities, which institution is responsible for what are the frequencies of the reforms, is there a clear budget attached to the different measures that need to be taken. So we hope to finalize this opening benchmark assessment report in the near future. Now, coming to our annual report that was published last year, and it's maybe interesting to note that we don't call it progress report anymore, even though we still measure progress over the last year, but we call it annual report because it also very much looks forward to the near future, to the year to come, in the form of recommendations. So first, maybe a few words on the progress that was made last year in the area of energy. We note that the law on energy was adopted, which is a very positive thing, and it clearly, as the Minister said, foresees the implementation of the second and third energy package of the European Union. We have also seen that electricity and gas markets were fully opened last year in 2015, which is a very positive step, and that the energy sector development strategy was adopted actually in December. We mentioned that this strategy was very much needed in our progress report or in our annual report, and 2 months later this strategy was adopted. On renewable energy, of course the energy law has been helpful, as well as the planning and construction law that was adopted last year, in enabling or making it easier to construct renewable energy facilities. Now, on the recommendations, as was already mentioned before, we are calling on the Serbian authorities to improve the alignment with the acquis, with the EU legislative framework, especially in renewable energy and energy efficiency. And I think here we need to say that it's not only about alignment, it's actually about implementation as well. And especially in the area of energy efficiency, I don't know the most up-to-date figures, but I remember that a couple of years ago a statistic was published by the OECD on energy efficiency of several countries, and there it turned out that for every industrial unit of output, industry here in Serbia needs 2.7 times the amount of energy compared to the OECD average. So that only goes to tell you that there's still quite some way to go in making the economy more energy efficient. On renewable energy, yes, we also very much would like to stress Serbia's goal to have 27% of all energy consumed from renewable energy by 2020. So for this, of course, it's important that accommodating policies are adopted. The minister already mentioned the power purchase agreement. I think it's very important that this power purchase agreement is now adopted soon. We have also, as a recommendation, to develop competition in the gas market. And as I mentioned already, the unbundling of Serbia gas is now being prepared. We have the plan. We are very much looking forward to this unbundling in order for Serbia also to adhere to the second and to the third energy package. And maybe linked to this also is the recommendation that we would like the Serbian side to accelerate the preparatory work for the gas interconnector between Serbia and Bulgaria. As was mentioned before, there's now only one gas entry point into Serbia, and it's obvious that Serbia in the long run would certainly benefit from having more than one gas entry point, also from a competition point of view. We also, as the ambassador mentioned, call upon achieving electricity cost-reflective tariffs, because we should not forget that in the future some substantial investments are very probably needed in especially generation. We have to have, of course, the thermal power plants in Serbia living up to environmental standards, to the, for example, large combustion power plant directive. So these costs should actually be reflected in the calculation on electricity tariffs. We mentioned also that Serbia is at the moment not participating in the region's electricity coordinated auction office. It was very positive that the electricity exchange was established a couple of weeks ago in Belgrade, but it would also be good if Serbia would participate in the auction office. And finally, we call upon the government to strengthen the role of the energy and nuclear regulator. And why is this important? At the moment, we have a situation in which, for the Energy Agency of the Republic of Serbia, its budget is only approved 2 years after the actual year it reflects. So it's an awkward situation, when in fact, of course, the Energy Agency's role is to take into account interests of all different parties, of producers, of consumers, appropriate staffing, appropriate adoption of its annual budget are really called for. Finally, a few words on our assistance. We have since the year 2000 provided substantial assistance to the energy sector in Serbia. First of all, we provided filters to the biggest power plant, Nikola Tesla, which really reduced air pollution significantly. We also have provided support for the implementation already of the oil stock strategy, which is very important for the near future. And also we are providing, or will provide, substantial grant funding for the interconnector between Serbia and Bulgaria. And at the same time, the European Investment Bank, together with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, is providing technical assistance for the preparation of this interconnector for the cost-benefit analysis. And let me just finalize by saying that also in the years to come, energy for the European Union will remain a very important sector when it comes to our instrument for pre-accession for Serbia. So we will very much remain in very close contact with the Serbian authorities and also with its civil society sector to see how we can best shape this assistance for the years to come. Thank you.